They say every artist dreams of one thing: hearing their song at the very top of the charts. That moment when the world finally notices, when your music echoes through radios, playlists, and late-night talk shows. Proof that everything you worked for has finally paid off. But here's the dirty little secret no one likes to admit. Not every number one deserves to be there. For every classic that earned its place, for every Bohemian Rhapsody or Billie Jean,
He was more like a beauty queen from a movie scene. I said, don't mind, but
there's another song that somehow climbed to the top and left the world asking, how did this happen? Because let's be honest, success doesn't always equal greatness. Sometimes, a song dominates the charts not because it's good, but because it's catchy enough, marketable enough, or just plain weird enough to catch fire for a few weeks before vanishing into the cultural void. And that's where the curse of number one begins. It's that eerie moment when fame turns into infamy, when an artist's proudest achievement becomes the song everyone pretends to forget. Decades later, these are the songs people remember for all the wrong reasons. Some of them were overproduced disasters by legends who should have known better. Others were strange, accidental hits that went viral long before viral was even a word. And a few were so painfully bad, they somehow became legendary again. Monuments to how weird the music industry can really be. Because topping the charts is one thing, but staying respected after you do it, that's an entirely different story. So today, we're diving deep into the graveyard of pop history. 10 songs that somehow reached number one and left listeners wondering if the charts have ever been trustworthy. From disco ducks to delusional ballads, from unholy collaborations to the creepiest love songs ever written. These are the tunes that prove the music industry can turn even the strangest sounds into global sensations. And by the end of this list, you might start to question something bigger. If these songs could reach number one, what does that say about the rest of us who put them there? Stars on 45 Beatles medley, a crime against the Fab Four. If you want to understand just how weird the music world can get, you only need to look back at the late 1970s. Disco was everywhere. It was the sound of nightclubs, roller rinks, and car radios, so popular that even rock fans who claimed to hate it couldn't escape it. But while disco had its undeniable charm, by the time the trend started to fade, it left behind some truly strange experiments. And none were stranger or more unforgivable than Stars on 45. Picture this. A group of studio musicians take a bunch of Beatles classics.
And when I touch you, I feel happy inside.
Songs that defined an entire generation and mash them together over a mindless disco beat. Now imagine they do it without an ounce of irony, as if turning Help and Nowhere Man
Not just anybody, the real Nowhere Man sitting.
into dance floor wallpaper was the tribute the Fab Four always wanted.
If you break my heart, I'll go. But I'll
Yeah, that happened. The Stars on 45 Beatles medley was supposed to be harmless fun, a kind of nostalgic dance record for people who missed the 60s but wanted to shake their hips like it was Studio 54. Instead, it turned into one of the most bizarre chart toppers in history. The song didn't just climb the charts, it rocketed to number one, sitting right next to some of the most respected artists of the time. And that's where the real problem begins. Because what Stars on 45 accidentally did was strip the Beatles of everything that made them special. All the soul, the wit, the revolutionary sound, replaced with robotic hand claps and a disco bass line that refused to die. It wasn't a tribute, it was an autopsy set to a dance beat. To make it worse, the medley didn't even use the real Beatles recordings. They hired sound-alike singers to imitate John, Paul, George, and Ringo, like a bad cover band at a wedding reception. If you squint your ears, you can almost hear the magic, but mostly, it just feels like someone put a mirror ball over Abbey Road and forgot to turn it off. Of course, the track's defenders will say, relax, it was just for fun. And sure, maybe it was. But there's something almost poetic about watching a song that Frankenstein together one of the greatest catalogs in music history and still managed to sound like the world's longest car commercial. Even worse, it worked. The record sold millions, launched a full album of copycat medleys, and inspired other artists to churn out disco versions of classic hits. Suddenly, every legendary band was fair game, from the Rolling Stones to the Archies. If it had a melody, someone somewhere was slapping a disco beat on it and hoping it'd make money. But in hindsight, Stars on 45 did teach the music world one valuable lesson. Just because you can remix something sacred doesn't mean you should. Because once you hear "She Loves You" sung over a glittery bass line and a snare that sounds like a typewriter, you can't unhear it. It's the sound of an era trying way too hard to stay relevant and accidentally proving that even timeless music can be butchered in the wrong hands. So yeah, if the 1960s gave us the Beatles and the 1970s gave us disco, then the 80s gave us the inevitable Hangover, a song that tried to dance its way into history and ended up stepping all over it. But if you think this was bad, wait until the 90s decided that being boring was the real crime against music. Because I Love You, the Postman's song, Stevie B's forgotten moment. Every decade has at least one song that becomes so popular, nobody really knows why. A song that seems to float in the air for months, at weddings, in shopping malls, on every soft rock station, and then one day, just disappears. For the early 90s, that song was Because I Love You.
Because I love you, now do it.
The Postman's Song by Stevie B. If you were alive in 1990, you probably heard it. A syrupy love ballad built around the kind of lyrics that sound heartfelt at first, until you realize they could have been written on the back of a Hallmark card. I got your letter from the postman just the other day. It starts tender, innocent, but by the second verse, it feels like you've been trapped inside the world's longest Valentine's Day commercial. Now, to be fair, Stevie B wasn't trying to trick anyone. He was a freestyle artist, known for energetic dance tracks, and this ballad was his attempt to show a softer side. And it worked. The song exploded, climbing all the way to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and staying there for 4 straight weeks. For a brief moment, Stevie B was the king of adult contemporary radio. But here's where the curse of #1 kicks in again. Because the moment the song left the charts, it vanished. Completely. It wasn't hated, it was forgotten. There's almost nothing crueler in pop music than being loved passionately for a month, then erased like it never happened. Part of the reason might be the song's tone. It's so safe, so polished, so drenched in reverb that it never feels real. It's the musical equivalent of a white lace curtain, pretty to look at, but impossible to remember once you've walked past it. And let's be honest, 1990 was a weird time for pop. The world was shifting from the glossy synth sounds of the 80s into grunge, hip-hop, and alt-rock rebellion. Right in the middle of all that, Stevie B released a song that felt like it belonged in a romantic soap opera from 10 years earlier. So why did it hit #1? Simple, timing and emotion. After a decade of neon and excess, listeners wanted something gentle, something sincere. They just didn't want that forever. Because I Love You was like the final love letter of the 80s. Mailed out just as the decade's post office was closing. Sweet, sentimental, and utterly outdated by the time it arrived. Today, when you hear it, you don't cringe, you just sort of blink and go, oh right, that song. It's not the worst #1 of all time, far from it. But it's proof that sometimes the songs that fade the fastest are the ones that tried the hardest to please everyone. Because when you write a love song that offends no one, it also moves no one. And that's the saddest fate a hit can have. Carnival, Kanye West's modern meltdown. There was a time when a Kanye West release felt like a global event, when the name Kanye meant innovation, genius, and danger, all rolled into one unpredictable storm. Every album felt like a dare, every song a statement. But by the time Carnival dropped in 2024, that storm had turned into something else entirely. A chaotic circus that left fans wondering if the ringmaster had finally lost control of his show. Carnival wasn't just a song. It was a spectacle, overloaded with guests, overstuffed with ego, and drenched in controversy before anyone even hit play. Kanye, or Ye as he now insisted on being called, had assembled an all-star lineup that included Playboi Carti, Rich the Kid, and Ty Dolla $ign. But somehow, it still sounded more like a chaotic parade than a musical masterpiece. The track opened with manic energy, distorted beats, aggressive flows. Voices layered over voices until it felt like being trapped in the middle of a sonic riot. For a moment, fans thought maybe Kanye was back, raw, unfiltered, creative. But the more you listened, the more it felt like something else entirely. A man trying to outrun his own legend. Because buried beneath the booming bass and carnival metaphors was a sense of desperation, as if he was fighting to prove he still mattered in an industry that had started moving on without him. Every lyric felt like a tug of war between brilliance and breakdown. And the reaction? Predictably explosive. Half the internet hailed it as a misunderstood masterpiece, the sound of a visionary breaking free from structure. The other half called it a meltdown in real time. Proof that the same chaos that once fueled his genius had finally consumed it. The thing about Kanye's music is that it's never just music. It's performance art, therapy, provocation, and, at this stage, maybe even a cry for help. Carnival wasn't polished. It wasn't elegant, but it was honest in the most unsettling way possible. He sounded like a man spiraling in public, turning his inner collapse into content, one verse at a time. Even his collaborators seemed caught in the whirlwind, lost in a swirl of half-baked hooks and sonic experiments that never quite landed. But despite all of that, Carnival still went viral. Not because it was universally loved, but because it was Kanye. People weren't listening for the music anymore. They were watching for the spectacle. And that's where the curse of number one strikes hardest. When the art stops being the focus, and the artist becomes the entire show. Carnival climbed the charts on controversy alone, trending across platforms, dissected in reaction videos, analyzed like a public therapy session. But when the noise faded, so did the song. No melody stuck, no hook lingered. Only the memory of chaos remained. It's ironic, really. The man who once redefined modern music had created a song that perfectly captured his downfall.
You've been putting up with my shit just way too long.
Loud, messy, impossible to ignore, and ultimately, empty at the core. Because sometimes, the greatest tragedy in pop music isn't when a song fails. It's when a genius succeeds at showing us just how lost he's become. Afternoon Delight, the world's least sexy song about sex. Some songs try to be sexy, others try to be clever. But Afternoon Delight somehow tried to be both, and ended up being neither.
And everything's a little clearer in the light of day. And we know.
Released in 1976 by the folk pop group Starland Vocal Band, the song became one of the strangest cultural moments of the entire decade. A chirpy, harmony-filled ode to midday passion that somehow topped the Billboard charts, while sounding like something you'd hear in a children's television sing-along. You'd never guess it was about sex, at least, not right away. With its bright acoustic guitars, playful whistling, and the kind of harmonies you'd expect from a Sunday morning church choir, Afternoon Delight felt squeaky clean. But listen closely, and the lyrics are anything but innocent. Rubbing sticks and stones together makes the sparks ignite. Let's just say, subtlety was never the problem. It's not that people didn't understand what the song was about. They did. They just couldn't believe a tune that sounded like a Sesame Street jingle was trying to describe a steamy rendezvous before dinner. It was so wholesome, it looped right back around to being weirdly uncomfortable. And yet, it worked. The song exploded in the summer of '76, landing Starland Vocal Band a Grammy for Best New Artist, beating out Boston and Hall & Oates. For a brief, bizarre moment, America was obsessed with the idea of daytime intimacy, delivered through the most innocent-sounding melody ever written. But here's where the curse hit. Because after Afternoon Delight, there was nowhere left to go. How do you follow up a hit that sounds like a church choir singing about hooking up in broad daylight? You don't. Starland Vocal Band released more albums, but the world had already laughed, loved, and moved on. Even today, the song lives on mostly as a punchline. It's been mocked in movies, parodied on Archer, and used in comedy sketches that highlight just how awkward it really is. It's one of those hits that's remembered, not because it's timeless, but because it's so strange that it can't be forgotten. What makes it even funnier is that the band didn't set out to be ironic. They took it seriously. They thought they'd written a clever, lighthearted tune about adult romance, not realizing they'd created one of the most unintentionally comedic songs in pop history. And yet, maybe that's the secret reason it went to number one. Because at its core, Afternoon Delight captures a certain innocence that doesn't really exist in pop music anymore. It's flirty without being explicit, silly without being cynical, and even though it makes listeners laugh today, There's a weird kind of charm buried inside that cheerful absurdity. Still, it stands as the ultimate example of how easily a love song can go wrong. A track meant to be seductive that ended up sounding like a preschool anthem for married couples trying to rekindle the spark. So yes, Afternoon Delight hit number 1. But for all the wrong reasons. Because when your sexy song makes people giggle instead of blush, you've officially crossed into musical history as the world's least sexy song about sex. Kokomo, the Beach Boys without the beach. There are few names in music history more sacred than the Beach Boys. They were the sound of the 1960s summer. Harmonies so perfect, they felt engineered by sunlight itself. Songs like Good Vibrations and God Only Knows didn't just define a generation. They redefined what pop music could be. But then came Kokomo. And for a lot of fans, that's where the dream ended. Released in 1988, Kokomo was the group's big comeback, their first #1 hit in over 20 years. It was supposed to be a return to paradise. Instead, it sounded like a travel brochure set to elevator music. The song was written for the Tom Cruise movie Cocktail, which tells you almost everything you need to know. From the first steel drum to the soft, sleepy chorus, Kokomo was pure escapism, a fantasy island of rhyming beach names. Aruba, Jamaica, oh, I want to take ya. It's catchy, sure, but not in the Beach Boys way, not sun-drenched and alive. It's plastic, synthetic, the sound of old legends trying to sound young again. And here's the kicker, Brian Wilson, the band's creative genius, wasn't even involved. He was completely absent from the recording, still struggling with personal issues while the rest of the group, led by Mike Love, teamed up with producer Terry Melcher to craft something radio-friendly. The result was polished, but hollow, like a Beach Boys tribute band that didn't quite understand what made the original magic work. But somehow it worked. Kokomo hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in late '88, knocking out big names like Guns N' Roses and Phil Collins. For a few months, it was everywhere. Pool parties, beach resorts, and family barbecues. It was the soundtrack to an artificial paradise, a song that felt like summer, even if it didn't sound real. Still, for longtime fans, it was almost heartbreaking. This wasn't the Beach Boys they grew up with. There was no experimentation, no tension, no spark, just safe, sugary nostalgia. The song was smooth, but soulless, a kind of musical sunscreen that covered everything but left nothing behind. Critics tore it apart. Rolling Stone called it a sun-bleached mirage, while others joked that it sounded like something you'd hear at a Sandals resort commercial. Even Family Guy and Full House couldn't resist parodying its absurdly wholesome vibe. And yet, Kokomo endures, not because it's great, but because it's unavoidable. Play the opening line, Aruba, Jamaica, and everyone can sing the rest, whether they love it or hate it. It's the ultimate example of how a song can be both iconic and embarrassing at the same time. The saddest part? It became the Beach Boys' last #1 hit, closing the book on one of the most innovative bands in pop history with a song that barely resembled their brilliance. Kokomo was supposed to be a return to form. Instead, it was a tropical mirage, proof that even legends can lose sight of what made them special when they start chasing the charts instead of the waves. Because sometimes, paradise isn't a place you can sing about. It's something you already lost when the music stopped feeling real. Blurred Lines, the creepiest party anthem ever. There are bad songs, and then there are songs that somehow manage to be catchy, controversial, and creepy all at once. Enter Robin Thicke's Blurred Lines. In 2013, this song was inescapable. It was the soundtrack of every club, wedding, and top 40 radio station on Earth. That slinky Pharrell-produced beat, those cowbell hits, and the cheeky falsetto hook. It all sounded like a modern-day Marvin Gaye moment. Smooth, sexy, effortless, until you actually listened to the lyrics. Because that's when things started to get ugly. Blurred Lines wasn't just suggestive, it was aggressively suggestive. The entire song circles around a guy insisting that a woman really wants it, despite her not saying so. That's not flirting. That's not seduction. That's a red flag in 4/4 time. For a while, it felt like no one noticed, or maybe no one wanted to notice. People were too busy dancing to Pharrell's groove to question what Robin Thicke was actually singing. But once the backlash started, it hit like a tidal wave. University campuses banned the song. Critics called it rapey and misogynistic. Even Robin Thicke himself, when asked years later, admitted that he didn't fully understand what the lyrics meant until he saw the reaction. By then, it was too late. The video didn't help either. It featured Thicke, Pharrell, and T.I. surrounded by half-naked models dancing suggestively while the guys smirked at the camera. It was supposed to be cheeky, but came off like a frat party that forgot to invite self-awareness. And while it was being praised for being edgy at the time, it aged like milk left in the sun. Then came the legal trouble. Marvin Gaye's family sued Thicke and Pharrell, claiming blurred lines ripped off Gaye's "Got to Give It Up." The case went to court, and the Gaye family won, forcing the pair to pay over $5 million in damages. It was one of the biggest music lawsuits in modern history, and it completely changed how copyright law was handled in pop music. But beyond the money and the memes, blurred lines became something bigger, a cultural turning point. Within just a few years, the world started to have serious conversations about consent, power dynamics, and how women are represented in pop culture. Suddenly, the cool guy act Thicke was selling didn't seem so cool anymore. And that's where things got even darker. After Blurred Lines, Thicke's personal life imploded. A messy divorce, a disastrous album named Paula,
Touch me on my fantasy. My body's yours.
written to win his ex-wife back, and public appearances that made him look more desperate than debonair. The same man who sang "I Know You Want It" was now begging for forgiveness on late-night TV. It was a brutal fall from grace. And yet, the song still lingers in bars, shopping malls, and throwback playlists, like a ghost of a time when no one thought twice about what was playing. Because here's the truth. Blurred Lines wasn't just a song, it was a mirror. It reflected an era of pop music obsessed with image, power, and dominance. And it showed just how quickly the lines between sexy and shady can blur. Catchy? Absolutely. But cool? Never again. And for Robin Thicke, that line, the one between superstardom and self-destruction, wasn't just blurred. It disappeared completely. Rich men north of Richmond, anger without aim.
Rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just wanna have.
Sometimes, a number one hit isn't about music at all. It's about anger, frustration, outrage, a public scream wrapped in a melody that's easy to digest. That was the case for Oliver Anthony's Rich Men North of Richmond. Released in 2023, the song went viral almost overnight. It sounded like a raw, live recording of a man singing in the woods, guitar in hand, voice gravelly, emotions pouring out. The lyrics are filled with grievances about politics, taxes, and social struggles. At first listen, it's relatable, the kind of catharsis that hits a nerve for anyone who's felt ignored by the system. But here's the catch. While the passion is real, the execution is chaotic. The song is loud with frustration, but light on nuance. It reads more like a diary of complaints than a fully thought-out argument. Half the lines are factually shaky, and the delivery, as raw as it is, often sounds like someone yelling at clouds. And yet, it worked. Millions streamed it. It climbed the charts. It hit number one. Not because the song was perfectly crafted or musically groundbreaking, but because it resonated. In a world full of polished pop and manufactured hits, here was a song that sounded authentic, even if it was messy. The reaction was just as polarized as the lyrics. Some listeners hailed Anthony as the voice of a forgotten demographic, applauding his honesty and raw emotion. Others criticized the song for being angry without direction, a collection of grievances masquerading as political commentary. Either way, it was impossible to ignore. This is the curse of number one in action again. Anthony reached the top of the charts not because of musical genius, not because of innovation, but because a single, viral idea connected with millions in a moment of shared emotion. The song is unforgettable, and yet, mostly because of its awkward, half-formed anger. It's a reminder that number one hits aren't always earned the traditional way. Sometimes, they're propelled by timing, context, and the emotional state of a country. And sometimes, a song that sounds rough, raw, and unpolished becomes a cultural phenomenon, even if, from a purely musical standpoint, it's painful to sit through. Rich Men North of Richmond proves one thing. A hit doesn't need polish. It doesn't need harmony. It just needs to strike a chord, even if that chord is frustration, confusion, or a little bit of disbelief. And for the artist, that's the bittersweet part. You hit number one, and yet, the song that takes you there is as messy, angry, and unresolved as the moment it was born in. Because sometimes, the curse of number one isn't about being bad. It's about succeeding in exactly the wrong way. You light up my life, so safe it hurts. Some number one hits are unforgettable because they're bold, daring, or downright outrageous. Others reach the top of the charts because they're painfully safe. And that's exactly where Debbie Boone's You Light Up My Life lands. Released in 1977, the song was a massive hit. It spent 10 weeks at number one, won a Grammy, and even earned a Golden Globe for Best Original Song. By all accounts, it should be celebrated. But here's the problem. Listen to it today, and it's almost impossible not to yawn. It's not that the song is bad. Boone's voice is pleasant, the melody is simple, and the lyrics are sincere. It's a love song meant to be comforting, uplifting, and accessible to everyone. But that's exactly why it's forgettable. Every note is so polished, so stripped of risk, that it almost feels sterile, like someone took all the emotional edges off a potentially great song. And let's put it in context. 1970s pop was filled with experimentation. Artists like Led Zeppelin, Fleetwood Mac, and Queen were pushing boundaries, creating music that challenged listeners. Meanwhile, Boone's track felt like it had been designed by a committee to offend no one, please everyone, and leave no lasting impression. The song's massive success wasn't a fluke. It was perfectly engineered for radio. Soft, soothing, and utterly uncontroversial, it became the go-to track for elevators, weddings, and family gatherings. Everyone could sing along, nobody could get offended, and critics had very little to complain about. And yet, here's the irony. The very thing that made You Light Up My Life so safe is also what keeps it in the worst number one's conversation. A hit that's so inoffensive that it's instantly forgettable is, in some ways, a crime against music itself. Boone herself didn't set out to create a bland hit. She was following in her father Pat Boone's footsteps, carving a wholesome, sincere path through the charts. But even the best intentions can result in a song that, decades later, sounds more like a historical footnote than a classic. You Light Up My Life is the ultimate example of the curse of number one. You can dominate the charts, sell millions, and sweep awards, and still leave listeners thinking, yeah, that was fine, I guess. It's a reminder that sometimes, being popular isn't the same as being memorable. And in the world of number one hits, that can be a fate worse than being hated. Ebony and Ivory. A good message, terrible execution.
Ivory live together in perfect.
When two musical legends like Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder join forces, you'd expect magic, harmony, creativity, something timeless. And yet, their 1982 collaboration, Ebony and Ivory, became one of the most infamous examples of a number one hit that should have been better. The song's message is undeniably noble: racial equality, unity, and friendship. It's in the title itself, a metaphor comparing piano keys to the hope that people of different backgrounds can live in harmony. The intention? Perfect. The execution? Not so much. From the first note, it's clear the song leans heavily on sentimentality. The melody is sweet, almost saccharine, and the production is polished to the point of blandness. Both McCartney and Wonder deliver technically flawless vocals, but there's no spark, no tension, no edge, nothing that makes you feel the lyrics beyond a polite nod. Critics were quick to point out the song's flaw. It was more like a corporate slogan set to music than a truly moving piece of art. The lyrics read like a children's storybook about friendship. Noble, yes, but simplistic to the point of forgettability. It's hard to believe that the same McCartney who wrote Let It Be and the same Wonder who gave us Superstition could create something so safe. And yet, it topped the charts. America loved it. It was radio-friendly, perfectly timed for a world hungry for messages of hope in the early 80s, and undeniably catchy. But here's the curse. Sometimes, a number one hit isn't remembered for its brilliance, but for its disappointment. People expected greatness, and what they got was a moralistic nursery rhyme dressed up as a duet between two giants. The irony is brutal. You had two of the most talented songwriters of their generation, given a platform to create something unforgettable, and instead, they produced a track that's polite, pleasant, and painfully forgettable. Even decades later, Ebony and Ivory is remembered less for its melody or harmonies and more for the disconnect between its intent and impact. It's the perfect example of how a song can be technically flawless, socially meaningful, and still fail to resonate. Because sometimes, the curse of number one isn't about being bad. It's about being forgettable, even when you're trying to say something important. Disco Duck, The Day Music Died Again.
All of a sudden I began to change. I was on the dance floor acting strange.
If there's one song that perfectly embodies the curse of number one, it's Rick Dees' Disco Duck. Released in 1976, at the height of disco mania, the song was a novelty track, a silly, over-the-top tune featuring a man quacking through an entire melody. Yes, you read that correctly, a man quacking. And somehow, in a twist of chart history, it reached number one on the Billboard Hot 100. Disco Duck wasn't meant to be serious. Rick Dees and his cast of idiots were clearly going for humor, parodying the craze of disco while cashing in on the trend. But what makes it stand out, and why it earned its spot on this list, is how painfully unfunny it is. Even for a novelty song, it's absurdly grating, overly saccharine, and impossible to listen to without wincing at least once. And yet it worked. People bought it, requested it on the radio, and danced to it. It became a bona fide hit, propelling Dees to fame and allowing him to become one of the biggest names in radio for decades. Here's the kicker. In the annals of novelty music, some songs are clever, satirical, or endearing. Disco Duck is none of these. It's not witty. It's not charming. It's a shallow, ridiculous novelty that somehow convinced millions of people to put it at the top of the charts. And that's what makes it tragic and hilarious. A man could literally quack his way to the top of the Hot 100, and the music world collectively shrugged, as if this were normal. It's a cautionary tale. Sometimes, number one isn't about quality, talent, or artistry. It's about timing, luck, and sheer absurdity. Even today, Disco Duck is remembered not as a classic of its era, but as a punchline, proof that chart success doesn't always equal musical greatness. It's the perfect ending to a list like this, a song that encapsulates everything wrong, weird, and inexplicable about reaching number one. Because if the charts are meant to reflect the best of music, then Disco Duck is the day they got it very, very wrong. So, what have we learned from this wild ride through some of the worst number one hits in history? First, hitting number one doesn't automatically mean a song is good. From the squeaky innocence of Afternoon Delight to the plastic nostalgia of Kokomo, and even the quacking absurdity of Disco Duck, the charts have proven that popularity and quality are two very different things. Second, context matters a lot. Rich Men North of Richmond didn't reach number one because it was a masterpiece. It hit because it captured a moment, a feeling, an emotion that resonated with people. Sometimes anger, nostalgia, or sheer novelty can carry a song to the top, even if the music itself is flawed. Third, expectations can be the harshest judge of all. When legends like Paul McCartney, Stevie Wonder, or the Beach Boys release songs that don't live up to their previous brilliance, the disappointment can feel bigger than the song itself. It's not just about the music, it's about the gap between potential and reality. And finally, there's the human side of music. Artists aren't robots. They experiment, they stumble, they chase trends, and sometimes they succeed in ways that surprise even them. The curse of number one is a reminder that the charts are chaotic, unpredictable, and often unfair. Some songs stay in our hearts. Others stay in our heads only because we can't believe they actually made it to the top. The takeaway? A hit song might be catchy, viral, or deeply resonant, but that doesn't make it timeless. Sometimes, the most famous tracks are famous for the wrong reasons, leaving a legacy that's equal parts baffling and fascinating. So next time you hear a number one hit on the radio, take a moment to ask yourself, is it brilliant or just lucky? Because as history has shown us, the curse of number one doesn't discriminate. It spares no one, from disco ducks to pop icons, and leaves behind stories that are as strange as they are unforgettable.